must I carry a burden? Spider my neck like a serpent. Stop trying to act like this is for certain. I'm so white like an effigy. Honor growing out so fast.
I sat in front of the mirror, tears streaming down my face as I stared at the 2 pink lines that confirmed what I had been dreading for the past week. I was pregnant. And not just pregnant, but pregnant with my baby. The thought of telling him terrified me, but I knew I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. As I carefully picked up my phone, I debated how to approach the conversation. Should I be direct and just tell him the news? Or should I try to ease into it somehow? I was so scared and nervous. I had no idea what to do. I knew I had to tell him eventually, but how? How could I possibly break the news that I was pregnant? With his child? I felt like such a fool, like I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to take a deep breath and just go for it. I couldn't keep it from him any longer. I walked into his office, trying to steady my nerves, and closed the door behind me. He looked up at me, his face filled with curiosity. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, concern etched into his features. "You've been acting strange all day. I need to talk to you," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "There's something I have to tell you." My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my cheeks burning with shame. How could I do this to him? My throat felt tight, and it was hard to breathe as I looked into his eyes. I'm pregnant," I finally managed to say. "I'm sorry, I don't know how this happened, but..." Tears began to stream down my face as I struggled to find the words to explain myself. Shock registered on his face before it slowly transformed into anger. "How could you?" he hissed through gritted teeth. "You know this changes everything." He stood up, towering over me, his expression darkened. "I thought I made it clear that I didn't want any complications." I flinched under his gaze, feeling more and more ashamed. I know. I whispered. "But I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted you to know." My voice trailed off as I searched his face for some sign of understanding or forgiveness. The anger in his eyes slowly began to fade, replaced by a look of despair. He sighed heavily and sat back down in his chair. "I don't know what to say," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe this is happening." He looked at me then, his expression softening slightly. "All right," he finally said. "Then we'll figure something out. We'll get through this together." His words were filled with determination, but I could still see the fear in his eyes. "In the meantime, you should probably see a doctor, just to make sure everything's okay." I nodded, relieved that he wasn't totally angry with me. "Thank you, Jimin. I love you so much." I leaned forward and him softly on the cheek. "I'm sorry for messing everything up." He wrapped an arm around me and pulled me close, his strength somehow reassuring. "It's going to be okay," he whispered into my hair. "We'll figure it out. We always do." And for the first time since I'd told him, I actually believed him. As the days went by, my belly began to grow, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. I was excited about becoming a mother, but terrified of what the future held. Jimin, however, was surprisingly supportive. He made sure I was eating right and getting enough rest, and even though he still looked a bit worried, he never once doubted that I could handle it. One day, he surprised me with a visit to a high-end maternity store. "You're going to need some new clothes," he said with a wink. "And we might as well start getting prepared." As we browsed through the designer dresses and adorable onesies, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Maybe this wasn't the end of us after all. Maybe we could actually make it work together. Later that night, as we lay in bed, he reached over and gently rubbed my belly. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you and our little one." His words brought tears to my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly loved and protected. "Thank you," I whispered, snuggling closer to him. "I love you." And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We spent the rest of the night cuddled up in bed, talking about our hopes and fears for the future. Jimin promised to do everything in his power to make sure I had everything I needed, and I told him I'd always be grateful for his support. As we drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected pregnancy wouldn't ruin everything after all. In the morning, I woke up to find Jimin already gone. He'd left a note on the nightstand, telling me he had some important business to attend to but would be back later that evening. With a sigh, I got out of bed and started my day, slowly but surely adjusting to this new reality. Later that day, Jimin called me with some big news. He'd found a way to make our situation work, and he wanted me to move in with him. I was both thrilled and nervous about the idea, but I knew that having his support would make all the difference in the world. Tentatively, I agreed, and we began making plans for my new life. As the weeks went by, I continued to grow more comfortable in my new surroundings. Jimin was always there for me, making sure I had everything I needed and never once complaining about the changes in our relationship. He even seemed to be enjoying fatherhood, despite his initial reservations. Finally, the day arrived when I went into labor. Jimin was by my side the entire time, holding my hand and encouraging me as I pushed through the pain. And when our beautiful baby girl finally entered the world, tears of joy streamed down his face. He cut the... And then, as if by instinct, he reached out and cradled her in his arms. In that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay. Our little family might not have been the traditional one we'd always dreamed of, but it was perfect in its own unique way. And as I looked up at Jimin, I felt a love for him that I'd never known existed. "Thank you," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled down at me, his eyes shining with tears of happiness. "I'm glad I was there," he said simply. "I'm glad I got to be your..." And in that moment, I knew that our story was far from over. Our lives may have taken an unexpected turn, but somehow, miraculously, it had all worked out. Together, we would make a beautiful family.